Some betrayals come wrapped in the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about love. Others arrive with the precision of a surgeon's blade, cutting through years of devotion with 3 simple words. You're too dependent. I never imagined that. The man who promised to cherish me would become the architect of my greatest humiliation, or that his downfall would become my greatest triumph. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family. Because this story is for everyone who's ever been made to feel small by the people who should have lifted them up. My name is Mira Chen. I am 32 years old, and I live in Belhaven, a mid-sized city where tech startups bloom like wildflowers, and old money still whispers in country club corridors. For 8 years, I believed I was living the dream married to a successful marketing executive, living in a beautiful colonial home with white picket fences and rosebush that I tended. With religious devotion, I thought I was building a life. I didn't realize I was building a prison. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in September. I was in our kitchen, the one with the marble countertops that Marcus had insisted we needed to project success, making his coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream, stirred counterclockwise because he claimed it made a difference. The morning light filtered through our bay window, casting geometric shadows across the hardwood floor I'd polished to perfection the night before. Marcus emerged from his home office, already dressed in his charcoal suit, the one that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He licked every inch for successful executive broad shoulders, perfectly styled hair, the kind of confident smile that had first attracted me at a networking event 8 years ago. Back then, I thought that smile was meant for me. Now I realized it was just another accessory, like his expensive watch or his leather briefcase. Morning beautiful, he said, but his eyes were already on his phone, scrolling through emails with the kind of intensity he'd once reserved for our conversations. I handed him his coffee, noting how he took it without looking up, without the small smile of gratitude that had once made my day brighter. Don't forget we have dinner with the Hartmans tonight, I reminded him. 7:30 at Bistro Margot. He paused, finally looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. About that? He said, setting down his coffee with deliberate care. I think it's time we talked about something important. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. In 8 years of marriage, I'd learned to read the subtle shifts in his tone, like a meteorologist reads storm clouds. This wasn't the voice of a man about to discuss dinner plans. What's wrong? I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Marcus leaned against the counter, creating physical distance between us in our own kitchen. Mira, I've been thinking a lot about us lately, about our relationship dynamic. The clinical way he said, relationship dynamic, made me feel like I was sitting in a therapist's office, rather than standing in the home we'd built together. What do you mean? You're too dependent on me, he said, the words falling between us like stones into still water. You don't work. You don't have your own income. You don't have your own life. It's becoming suffocating. I felt the blood drain from my face. I don't work because we agreed I would focus on our home, on starting a family. You said you wanted a wife who could be available, who could support your career. That was different then, he interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. I was climbing the corporate ladder. I needed someone who could handle the domestic side of things, but now I'm established. I need a partner, not a dependent. The cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. A dependent? Marcus, I manage our entire household. I coordinate your schedule, host your clients, maintain our social calendar. I've sacrificed my own career aspirations to support yours, and I appreciate that, he said. But his tone suggested otherwise. But let's be honest, Myra, you gave up your marketing coordinator position to play house. You've been out of the workforce for 6 years. You don't have marketable skills anymore. Each word was a carefully placed cut, designed to wound precisely where it would hurt most. I had been a marketing coordinator at a growing digital agency when we married. I'd loved that job, the creative challenges, the collaborative environment, the satisfaction of seeing campaigns come to life. But Marcus had convinced me that his career had more potential, that we'd be better off financially if I supported his advancement rather than pursuing my own. I could go back to work, I said, hating how defensive I sounded. I could update my skills, find a position. Doing what? He asked. And there was something almost cruel in his smile. Entry-level positions for someone your age. Making $30,000 a year when you're used to this lifestyle. He gestured around our kitchen, with its high-end appliances and designer fixtures. Everything I'd helped him choose. Everything I'd made into a home rather than just a house. I make $200,000 a year, he continued. I provide everything. The house, the car, the vacations, the country club membership. You contribute. Recipes and small talk at dinner parties. I stood there, absorbing the full impact of his assessment of my worth. In that moment, I understood that somewhere along the way, the man I'd married had begun to see me not as a partner, but as an expensive pet, beautiful, well-trained, utterly dependent on his generosity. I want you to think about getting a job, he said, straightening his tie with the casual efficiency of someone who'd just delivered an ultimatum disguised as a suggestion. Something to give you independence, purpose. It'll be good for both of us. And if I don't want to work? I asked, though I already knew the answer. His smile was cold, final. Then you'll have to accept that this dynamic isn't sustainable. I'm not running a charity, Myra. I'm 34 years old. And I'm not interested in carrying dead weight. Dead weight. The words echoed in my mind long after he'd left for work. Long after I'd stood alone in our perfect kitchen, surrounded by the life I'd thought we'd built together. I realized then that Marcus had been planning this conversation for months, maybe years. The gradual erosion of compliments, the increasing impatience with my interests, the way he'd started introducing me as my wife, rather than by my name, it had all been leading to this moment. I spent that morning walking through our house like a stranger, seeing everything with new eyes. The living room where I'd arranged fresh flowers every week for 8 years. The guest bedroom I'd decorated for the children we'd never had, because Marcus kept saying, "Not yet, and when my career stabilizes." The garden where I'd spent countless hours creating beauty that he'd never once commented on. It was all beautiful, all perfect, all meaningless if I was nothing more than an expensive ornament in his successful life. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my former colleague, Jean Martinez, who'd stayed in the marketing world while I'd retreated to domestic perfection. We'd maintained a friendship over the years, though I'd always felt slightly embarrassed by the growing gap between her career achievements and my housewife status. "Myra," she said when she answered, her voice bright with genuine pleasure. "What a lovely surprise. How are you?" I paused, unsure how to explain my situation without sounding pathetic. "I'm thinking about getting back into the workforce. I know it's been a while, but I was wondering if you might have any advice." There was a moment of silence, and I imagined her calculating the years since I'd left marketing, the rapidly evolving landscape of digital advertising, the challenge of explaining a 6-year gap in employment. "Of course," she said finally. "Though I have to ask, is everything okay? You sound stressed." I found myself telling her everything: Marcus's ultimatum, his casual dismissal of my contributions, the way he'd made me feel like a burden rather than a partner. Jen listened without interruption, and when I finished, She was quiet for a long moment. Mira, she said finally. I'm going to tell you something that might sound crazy, but I think you should hear it. We've been looking for someone to head up our new client relations department. It's a role that requires someone with people skills, attention to detail, and the ability to manage complex schedules and personalities. I don't have recent experience. You have 8 years of experience managing a successful executive's life. She interrupted. You've been doing client relations, project management, and strategic planning. You just haven't been getting paid for it. The conversation that followed changed everything. Jean's agency, Stellar Communications, was expanding. Rapidly, they needed someone who could bridge the gap between creative teams and high-maintenance clients. Someone who could translate corporate speak into human language and vice versa. The position paid $80,000 a year to start, with performance bonuses and rapid advancement opportunities. I'd need to interview, I said, my heart racing with a mixture of terror and excitement I hadn't felt in years. Consider it a formality, Jen said. I've seen you in action at industry events. You have a gift for making people feel heard and valued. That's exactly what we need. That evening, I sat in our dining room, staring at the formal table setting I'd arranged for our dinner with the Hartmans. Marcus had texted that he'd be working late, that I should apologize and reschedule. It was the kind of casual dismissal of my efforts that I'd accepted for years. But tonight it felt different. Tonight, I saw it for what it was, a complete lack of respect for my time and effort. I called the Hartmans and explained that Marcus had been delayed. Instead of apologizing profusely as I usually did, I suggested we reschedule for the following week. Then I cleared the table, put away the expensive china, and made myself a simple dinner of pasta and salad. Marcus came home at nearly 10 o'clock, smelling of expensive cologne and wine. He found me in the living room, reading a book on digital marketing trends that I'd ordered online that afternoon. Sorry about dinner, he said, not sounding sorry at all. Big client crisis, you know how it is. I rescheduled with the Hartmans, I said without looking up from my book. Good. You're learning to be more flexible. He loosened his tie, moving toward the stairs. I'm exhausted. Don't wait up. I listened to his footsteps on the hardwood floors, the sound of the shower running in our master bathroom, the creak of the bed as he settled in for the night. For the first time in years, I didn't follow him upstairs. Instead, I stayed in the living room, reading about social media algorithms and content marketing strategies, educating myself about the world I'd left behind. The next morning, I had my interview with Stellar Communications. I wore my best suit, the navy blue one I'd bought for a charity gala 2 years earlier, and I prepared as if my life depended on it. Because in many ways it did. The interview went better than I dared hope. Jean's partners were impressed by my ability to discuss client psychology, my understanding of brand messaging, and my experience managing complex social dynamics. They offered me the position on the spot. With a start date of the following Monday, I accepted immediately, then spent the rest of the day in a state of euphoric disbelief. For the first time in years, I had somewhere to be, something to do, a purpose beyond making Marcus's life more comfortable. That evening, I waited until Marcus was settled in his home office before I knocked on the door. He looked up from his laptop with the mildly annoyed expression he'd perfected over the years. Got a job? I said simply. His eyebrows rose. That was fast. Where? Stellar Communications, Client Relations Manager. I start Monday. For a moment, he looked genuinely surprised. Then his expression shifted to something that might have been approval. That's great, Mira. I'm proud of you for taking initiative. The condescension in his tone was unmistakable, but I let it slide. I'll need to adjust my schedule. I won't be able to handle all the household management the way I have been. We'll figure it out, he said, already turning back to his laptop. Maybe we can hire a housekeeper. I left him to his work. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't quite grasped the full implications of my new independence. In his mind, I was still his wife first, everything else second. He expected me to seamlessly add a full-time career to my existing responsibilities without reducing my availability to him. He was about to learn otherwise. My first week at Stellar Communications was a revelation. I'd forgotten how good it felt. To be valued for my mind, to contribute to something meaningful, to be part of a team working toward common goals. Jen had been right, my skills translated beautifully to client relations. I had a natural ability to read people, to understand what they needed to feel confident and supported. More importantly, I was good at it. Really good. By the end of my first month, I'd successfully managed 3 major client crises, developed a new onboarding process that improved client satisfaction scores by 30%, and earned praise from both colleagues and clients. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. I found myself standing straighter, speaking with more confidence, taking up space in ways I'd forgotten were possible. I was remembering who I'd been before I disappeared into Marcus's definition of the perfect wife. At home, the changes were more subtle but equally significant. I stopped making Marcus's coffee in the morning, explaining that my new schedule required me to leave earlier. I hired a cleaning service to handle the deep cleaning I'd once done myself. I began declining social invitations that didn't interest me, even if they were important for Marcus's networking. He noticed, but he didn't complain. In fact, he seemed almost relieved. The dynamic he'd found so suffocating was shifting, and he appeared to appreciate having a wife who was occupied with her own concerns rather than constantly available for his. What he didn't anticipate was how quickly I would excel in my new role, or how much my success would begin to overshadow his own career stagnation. 3 months into my new job, I was promoted to Senior Client Relations Manager, with a salary increase to $95,000. I was managing major accounts, developing strategic partnerships, and being courted by headhunters from larger agencies. My success was visible and measurable in ways that Marcus's middle management position wasn't. It was around this time that I began to notice changes in Marcus's behavior. He became more critical of my work, The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd criticized me for being too dependent was now threatened by my independence. The real test came 6 months into my new career, when Marcus's company announced a major restructuring, cost-cutting measures, elimination of redundant positions, a focus on streamlining operations. The corporate speak was familiar to me now. I'd learned to translate it in my own role. Marcus came home that evening with news that his department was being reorganized. His position was safe, he assured me, but several of his colleagues had been let go. He was clearly shaken, though he tried to hide it behind his usual confident facade. "It's actually a good thing," he said over dinner. "More responsibility for the people who remain. Better opportunities for advancement." I nodded supportively, but I could see the fear in his eyes. For the first time in his career, Marcus was feeling genuinely vulnerable. His company was struggling. His department was shrinking, and his role was no longer as secure as he'd believed. Meanwhile, my own career was flourishing. I'd been headhunted by 3 different agencies in the past month, each offering significant salary increases. Stellar Communications had responded by promoting me to Director of Client Relations and increasing my compensation to $120,000 annually. I was earning more than half of what Marcus made, and my trajectory was steep and upward while his was stagnant at best. The night everything changed started with a phone call at 11:30 p.m. Marcus was already asleep, but I was in the kitchen, reviewing presentation materials for a new business pitch. The call was from Marcus's direct supervisor, David Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname. "Mira, I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to reach Marcus urgently. His phone is going straight to voicemail." I felt a chill run down my spine. David had never called our home number before. He's asleep. Is this something I should wake him for? There was a pause, and I heard David take a deep breath. Yes, I think you should. We need to discuss his situation tomorrow morning. First thing, I woke Marcus, who took the call in his office with the door closed. I could hear the rise and fall of his voice, increasingly agitated, but I couldn't make out the words. When he emerged 20 minutes later, his face was pale and his hands were shaking. What happened? I asked. Budget cuts, he said, his voice hollow. They're eliminating my position effective immediately. I have 2 weeks to transition my responsibilities. I stared at him, processing the information. After 8 years of marriage, I was seeing Marcus truly vulnerable for the first time. The confident, successful executive who'd made me feel like a burden was suddenly unemployed. Suddenly dependent on the wife he'd dismissed as deadweight. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want to see him suffer. I'll find something else, he said quickly. Something better. This is probably a blessing. In disguise. But over the following weeks, it became clear that the job market wasn't as welcoming to Marcus as he'd expected. His industry was contracting. His skill set was more specialized than he'd realized. And his age was working against him in a field that increasingly valued young, hungry professionals over experienced executives. Meanwhile, my own career continued its upward trajectory. I was featured in a trade publication article about rising stars in client relations. I was invited to speak at industry conferences. I was offered a position at a prestigious national agency that would have doubled my salary. I turned down the national agency offer, but not before using it to negotiate another promotion and raise at Stellar Communications. I was now earning $140,000 annually, with bonuses that could push my total compensation closer to $160,000. Marcus had been unemployed for 2 months. The shift in our household dynamic was profound and uncomfortable. I was now the primary breadwinner, the one with the busy schedule and important meetings. Marcus was the one managing household tasks, fielding calls from recruiters, and increasingly depending on my income to maintain our lifestyle. The role reversal was complete, but unlike Marcus, I didn't make him feel like a burden. I didn't question his contributions or dismiss his efforts. I simply continued working, earning, and supporting our household while he searched for new opportunities. But I also didn't pretend that things were the same as they'd been before. One evening, after Marcus had prepared dinner, something he'd never done in our 8 years of marriage, he brought up the subject that had been hovering between us for weeks. I know this situation is temporary, he said, clearing the dishes with the careful attention of someone unaccustomed to domestic tasks. I'll find something soon. Something that pays well. I know you will, I said. Though privately I wondered if he understood how much the job market had changed, how much his extended unemployment was likely to impact his earning potential. I just want you to know I appreciate you carrying us financially right now. I know. It's not what we planned. I really looked at him, and saw something I'd never seen before. Humility, genuine gratitude. The arrogance that had characterized his treatment of me for years was gone, replaced by the vulnerability of someone who'd realized how quickly circumstances could change. Marcus, I said carefully, do you remember what you said to me 8 months ago? About being too dependent? He had the grace to look ashamed. I was wrong. I was an ass. I didn't appreciate everything you did for our family. You called me dead weight, I reminded him. I was threatened, he admitted. I felt like I was carrying all the financial responsibility, and instead of appreciating your contributions, I resented them. I was wrong. It was the first genuine apology he'd offered in years, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness. Exactly. but a recognition that we both learned something important about dependence and independence, about value and contribution. I want you to know, I said, that I won't make you feel the way you made me feel. You're not dead weight, you're not a burden, you're my husband, and we're partners. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Even though I hurt you. Especially because you hurt me, I said. I know what it feels like to be dismissed by someone who's supposed to love you. I won't do that to you. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past year settling between us. Then Marcus asked the question I'd been expecting. What happens now? Between us? I considered the question seriously. I don't know. We're different people than we were a year ago. I'm not the dependent wife you married, and you're not the arrogant executive I fell in love with. We need to figure out who we are now. I'd like to try, he said quietly. If you're willing. I looked at him across our dining room table. This man who'd once made me feel worthless, and who now depended on me for his very survival. The revenge I'd imagined, if I'd ever consciously imagined it had been nothing like this. There was no dramatic confrontation, no crushing blow, no moment of triumphant vindication. Instead, there was something more subtle and perhaps more powerful. The quiet satisfaction of having proven my worth not through his diminishment, but through my own elevation. I hadn't needed to destroy him to validate myself. I'd simply needed to build myself up. I'm willing to try, I said. But things are different now. I'm different now. I know, he said. I can see that you're stronger, more confident, more yourself. I'm not going to go back to being the woman I was. I warned him. I like who I'm becoming. I like having a career, having independence, having my own identity. I wouldn't want you to, he said, and I believed him. 6 months later, Marcus found a new position. It was a lateral move rather than an advancement, with a salary significantly lower than his previous role. He was now earning $90,000 annually, $50,000 less than me. The adjustment was difficult for him. He'd built his identity around being the primary provider, the successful executive, the one who made the important decisions. Now he was the secondary earner in a household where his wife's career was more prestigious and more lucrative than his own. But he was learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, to find value in other contributions. He'd become genuinely skilled at managing our household, at creating the kind of domestic support system I'd once provided for him. He was learning to take pride in enabling my success rather than competing with it. I was learning too. I was discovering. That strength didn't require cruelty. That success didn't require making others feel small. I could be powerful without being vindictive, independent without being dismissive. The marriage we were building was different from the one we'd had before. It was more balanced, more honest, more respectful. We were both contributing according to our abilities and circumstances, and we were both valued for those contributions. One evening, almost a year after Marcus had lost his job, we were having dinner at Bistro Margot, the same restaurant where we'd planned to eat with the Hartmans on the night. He'd first called me too dependent. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I've been thinking about that conversation we had, Marcus said, cutting into his steak with deliberate precision. The one where I told you that you were too dependent. I remember, I said dryly. I was projecting, he continued. I was the one who was too dependent on feeling superior, on being the one who made all the money, on having control. I was so threatened by the idea of you having your own life that I convinced myself you were the problem. I set down my fork, studying his face. What made you realize that? Being unemployed, he said simply. Being the one who needed support instead of providing it. Realizing how quickly everything I thought was permanent could disappear. And now? Now I'm learning to be proud of my wife's success instead of threatened by it. I'm learning that a strong partner makes me stronger, not weaker. I smiled, remembering the woman I'd been a year ago. Insecure, dependent, afraid of her own shadow. That woman would have been grateful for these words, would have seen them as validation of her worth. But the woman I'd become understood something more important. My worth had never been dependent on Marcus's recognition of it. I'd always been valuable, I'd always been strong. I'd just forgotten for a while. I'm proud of you too, I said, for being willing to change, to grow, to admit when you were wrong. I had a good teacher, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. You could have made me feel as worthless as I made you feel, instead. You showed me what grace looks like. We sat there in the restaurant, holding hands across the table. And I realized that this was what real victory looked like. Not the destruction of my enemy, but the transformation of my partner. Not revenge, but redemption. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I thought about the YouTube channel I'd discovered during my darkest moments, Revenge Treats. I'd watched countless stories of people who'd been wronged, who'd found elaborate ways to get back at those who'd hurt them. I'd fantasized about my own revenge story, imagining the dramatic ways I might make Marcus pay for his cruelty. But my story had turned out differently. Instead of treats, I'd found something more nourishing. The satisfaction of proving my worth through my own success, rather than through his failure. The revenge I'd ultimately achieved was the best kind. The kind that elevated everyone involved. Marcus never became the arrogant executive he'd once been. His unemployment had humbled him in ways that success never could. He'd learned to value partnership over dominance, collaboration over control. I never became the dependent wife I'd once been. My career continued to flourish. My confidence continued to grow, and my sense of self continued to strengthen. I'd learned that independence wasn't just about earning money. It was about knowing your own worth regardless of external validation. Today, 3 years after that conversation in our kitchen, I'm the Senior Vice President of Client Relations. At Stellar Communications, I earn $200,000 annually, with bonuses that often push my total compensation past $250,000. I'm respected in my industry, sought after by competitors, and fulfilled in ways I never imagined possible. Marcus is a project manager at a growing startup. He earns $100,000 annually, and he's genuinely happy with his work. He's learned to find satisfaction in being part of a team rather than leading it, in contributing to success rather than claiming credit for it. We're still married, but we're different people in a different marriage. We're partners in the truest sense, each bringing our own strengths, each supporting the other's growth, each valued for our unique contributions. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry about those years when I felt worthless, when I allowed myself to be diminished by someone who was supposed to love me. The answer is complicated. I'm angry at the system that taught me to find my value in a man's approval. I'm angry at the society that makes women feel like they have to choose between career and family, between independence and love. I'm angry at the expectations that made both Marcus and me believe that his success was more important than mine. But I'm not angry at Marcus anymore. He was as much a victim of those expectations as I was. He was taught to find his worth in dominance, in control, in being the provider. When I began to threaten that identity, he lashed out not from malice but from fear. The real victory isn't that I now earn more than he does, or that I've achieved the professional success he once dismissed as impossible. The real victory is that we've both learned to find our worth in who we are, rather than in who we're supposed to be. My revenge was never about hurting Marcus. It was about healing myself. It was about remembering that I was valuable before I met him, that I was strong before he told me I was weak, that I was worthy before he made me feel worthless. The woman who stood in that kitchen 3 years ago, absorbing the blow of being called too dependent, couldn't have imagined the woman I've become. She couldn't have pictured the career I've built, the confidence I've gained,